Welcome to Chapter 5, Selecting Foreign Markets. In this section, I'd like to talk a bit about segmenting your market. You can segment a market basically in four ways: by demographics, psychographics, geographic, or by behavioristic differences. So first I'd like to take a look at demographics. You did talk about demographics a little bit earlier when you first started understanding the target market for your product, but I want to revisit that a bit. Demographics are roughly observable features of a population. Granted, as you can see on the list, not all of them are observable, but some demographics might be age. Are you targeting older adults? Are you targeting children? Are you targeting seniors? Income. We'll talk a little bit about income more in a minute. Gender, ethnicity, education, occupation, family size, family life cycle, and let me talk about that in a minute. Stage of the family life cycle is where somebody is in terms of whether or not they have children, generally speaking. So somebody who has a couple of children in diapers is going to have very, very different needs from an empty nester. It is also worth pointing out that family life cycle in years past used to correspond very closely with age, but obviously that is no longer the case. Religion, we'll talk about a bit about that in a minute as well. And lastly, social class. So I said we would talk about income. One of the populations that marketers have forgotten until fairly recently are those that are living in poverty. There's a very famous, well, now it's a very famous book that came out a few years ago by C.K. Prahlad called The Bottom of the Pyramid that argues, you know what, that we don't have to focus just on affluent folks to make a profit. And in fact, if you think about it, there's really only two ways to make a profit. You can either sell few of an items, but with high enough margins to be profitable, or you can sell lots and lots of an item at a lower price point and make a smaller margin on a per unit basis. So what C.K. Prahlad was arguing, he's saying, let's not ignore people that are living in poverty because they do have some of the same wants the rest of us do. You can be profitable if you set your business up correctly. And Danone has done this very thing. And in fact, the photo that you see is the couple of the executives looking out across Senegal, and they were asking, is it possible, you think about Danone, at least I tend to think about kind of higher end premium items, but recently they have introduced a yogurt drink and sell at the little stores there for 10 cents a package. And if you look in front of the little girl, you can see the advertisement for it. It says Dolima. It's interesting that they don't even have the name Danone on the packaging. And if you look at the colors, they're from the Senegal flag. So it kind of implies a very local brand. And it's taken off very well because people do want that in countries like Senegal and like Indonesia. And in fact, in Indonesia, where the average per capita income is only $11 a day, the little packets of yogurt have been extremely popular. Extremely popular. So in fact, in 2004, they started selling 10-cent packets, 70-gram plastic bottle. And it was such a hit with lower-income consumers and children, they ended up selling 10 million bottles in its first 3 months on the market in Indonesia. So very impressive. They're hoping to do something similar in Senegal. They've run into some challenges in terms of things like getting enough milk production, in terms of making sure that the product is kept cold, etc. More recently, they teamed up with Mohammed Yunus, a name that you may or may not recognize from the Grameen Bank. He was the one that started micro-lending in Bangladesh to try to see what they could do to lend money to poor entrepreneurs. And they started a venture called Grameen Danone Foods Limited. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. As you can see by the graphic, Danone is focusing increasingly on emerging economies. And that makes sense if you think about it in terms of demographics. You know, where is the growth? A country like, well, like a lot of Europe, to a lesser extent the United States, a country like Japan has a much older population. They're not going to be consuming this type of products as readily as countries with a very young and growing population. So hence the interest in thinking about the bottom of the pyramid. Okay, another growing group that's worth considering are Muslims. And in fact, the halal market, which is products targeting Muslims, is valued at 2.1 trillion in 2013. So even more so now that we're in 2015. That's amazing. And 9% of halal products are cosmetics, which is one of the fastest growing categories. And in fact, it was just a few years ago that our local Center for National Trade Development and some other business groups got together and did a trade mission to the United Arab Emirates, focusing on cosmetics because there is so much demand in Muslim countries. So, one of the challenges that observant Muslim women face is keeping their hair clean and keeping it in good condition if they're veiling. So, Unilever and Henkel have stepped forward and said, okay, we're going to craft a shampoo and craft a marketing campaign specifically targeting women that veil. And this ad, if you look at it, is quite fascinating because it's certainly the first ad I've ever seen that for a hair care product, for shampoo, that doesn't show hair. All right, psychographics are a little bit less observable, but they're, I guess you could say, they're what makes somebody tick. In the United States, a lot of times we look at what are called VALs, which are values, attitudes, and lifestyles, to categorize people according to their behavior and according to their values. One company that has a very distinct psychographic target market is this one. This is a shot from one of their catalogs. You may or may not recognize that this is Patagonia. And specifically, they target folks who are very, very concerned about the environment and are very, very into pretty extreme outdoor adventures. And they refer to them by a rather distinctive name that you might think is pejorative, but they use it as a compliment, and that is dirt bags. So their primary market is somebody like the gentleman you see right here that's really, really serious about the outdoors, both in terms of experiencing it and in terms of preserving it. Because Patagonia's products are so well engineered, they tend to be very, very expensive. So somebody who's extremely into the outdoors is willing to pay the price to get a more expensive product. So a good example of psychographics. And then last, we have behavioristics, which in some sense is a bit of a catch-all category. And these are things like the need that the product might fulfill. A couple of the behavioristics your author points out are brand loyalty. If somebody is a strong user of the product, maybe you want to reward them with that, with a loyalty card. Maybe they get on their 10th ice cream, they get their 11th free, something along those lines. They would be different from somebody that you're trying to convert to the brand. Another category, if you will, or subcategory of behavioristics is first adopters. There's a very well-known book out on marketing high-technology products called Crossing the Chasm that says, you know what, it's not that hard to get the early adopters, but the challenge is getting the middle of the market, getting people to cross the chasm. Because people that are first adopters or early adopters, especially of technology, are very different from later adopters. And then last, I want to look at geographic. Obviously, you could categorize based on urban versus rural. And this makes a lot of sense. In the previous picture, we saw some girls using a cell phone, I believe in India. A lot of times, cell phone companies will target urban areas first, not surprisingly, to get higher, faster penetration rates. Another way of thinking about geography is the fact that some countries, even though their political units may be very, very different in terms of their subcultures. Case in point is Spain. Spain is one country, obviously, but they're very, very distinct regions. So even linguistically, so we could divide it into the area around Madrid, and then we've got País Vasco, or the Basque country, where they speak Basque, and Catalunya, where they speak Catalan, and those two areas see themselves very, very differently. And in fact, at various points in times, they have agitated to secede from Madrid and form their own countries. So if you have a sales force that's working in Spain, it's very, very important that they be sensitive to those regional differences.